Hey guys, this is Angie and welcome back to my channel. Here I make simple bullet journaling related content. Today we're going to be doing my bullet journal setup for February 2023. So I know a lot of people associate February with Valentine's Day, but I really didn't want to do a Valentine's Day theme. So I looked up the origin of the word February, and apparently it's named after an ancient Roman ritual of purification. So I thought a perfect theme would be kind of like cleanliness, soap, bubbles, that kind of thing. So starting with my cover page, I'm taking a fine liner and I'm going to be using a thicker fine liner at this point to draw the basic shape of a bar of soap. When drawing the lines, I don't make all the lines connected. I leave little gaps here and there because it makes it look a little softer and not as harsh to the eyes, or at least in my opinion. So now I'm going to take a slightly smaller fine liner and I'm going to be doing, the 3D part of it to show that it's three-dimensional and not just flat on paper. I'm not quite sure what to call it, but the outline for the 3D part. And then down below, I am using another fine liner and I am drawing bubbles, again with the same technique as the bar of soap, where I don't connect all the lines. I leave little gaps, and then I make the bubbles overlap each other and different sizes. So I actually sketched this whole thing out beforehand, and I used a circle stencil for this, just because I didn't want the bubbles to look all wonky, because I cannot draw a circle for the life of me. What you'll also notice throughout this whole setup is I decided against using rulers, simply because these fine liners are new, and I guess when markers are really new, you really try and be careful with them, rather than like old ones that you've had for a while, and I really didn't want to fray the tips. So what you just saw me do there is add some sparkles in the corner, because, cleanliness. And then I decided against coloring in everything, but rather just doing the same kind of outline with the gaps and not fully connected with color. So you'll see me using two different calligraph markers from Archer and Olive, and these are the only two colors that I really use throughout this whole setup, of course excluding the black fine liners. So I use a purple for the bar of soap, and then I'm using this blue shade for the bubbles. And I'm using the broad tip of the marker because I noticed that there are slight color variations between the fine tip and the broad tip, and at this point I wanted to use the broad tip color, but later on I do use the fine tip color. And these markers are brush pens, just so you know. So next, I am taking these circle stickers that I got also recently, and I'm putting them kind of scattered on the page in a sort of formation that rises up to kind of represent bubbles that are rising up past the bar of soap and not just the foamy bubbles at the bottom. And I did put one that overlaps with the bar of soap, but what you'll see is I'll take my X-Acto knife and cut it so that it looks like it's behind the bar of soap. So I add all these stickers, and again in that formation where at the bottom you have more concentrated bubbles and more bubbles, and at the top you have kind of it fading away. So here's me using my X-Acto knife. And then I thought that these bubbles didn't really look all that realistic, So I went in with a white gel pen and added highlights to everything on the page. And honestly, it makes a huge difference, especially on those circle stickers. Right now, they just kind of look like dots. But as soon as I add those highlights on top, it just all of a sudden becomes very clear what they're supposed to be. And that's, of course, bubbles. I also add the highlight to the bar of soap. And with highlights, you want to make sure that you always add highlights as though the light is coming from one direction, and not just add random highlights everywhere, because otherwise it won't look all that realistic and it'll look a little chaotic. So in this case, I was adding the highlights as though the light was coming from the right side. So now I'm using the finer tip of the purple calligraph brush pen, and I'm writing February with this I'm not sure what you would call this font, but it's not brush lettering, because I thought that wouldn't fit that well on the bar of soap. And then I have my quote page on the side here, which says, "Out of clutter, find simplicity," which is attributed to Albert Einstein. But so many quotes have been attributed to Albert Einstein that I'm not quite sure if he actually said it or not. But I found it online, so. And I'm using the finer tips at first for both the purple and the blue. But then I realized that it's just the blue words didn't pop out that much with such a fine line. So I went over it. As you can see, it's much thicker here with the thicker side, and I like it a lot better. Then I went in with a very small fine liner and just added shadows to the words clutter and simplicity, just so they pop even more off the page. Overall, I kept this whole setup pretty simple, and honestly, it's one of my favorite bullet journal setups I've done so far. I don't know if it's the colors or if it's just how simple and clean it looks. Pun not intended, because, the theme is clean. But it's really one of my favorites. And what you'll see in a second is here, I thought that I needed to balance out the blue circles on the other side of the page. So I'm putting purple stickers here. Purple circle stickers here, and I'm not adding highlights to them because on this page I'm not really using them as bubbles, but more of just decoration, so I didn't think a highlight was necessary. All materials that I use in this setup will be linked down below. So now we're moving on to my calendar page, and this page is the same as it was last month, and that's because it really works for me. So at the top, I'm writing February in a similar font that I wrote on the bar of soap, but not quite the same. And here I'm just drawing the calendar. So I made each box the same size as the January calendar, and I used the same technique of the horizontal lines being connected and the vertical lines being this kind of dotted dashed line with the gaps, the same kind of technique that I used on the bubbles and on the bar of soap. And like last month, I am making the first and last day of the week a little smaller in size than the rest of the days, because there's a space between the last dot of the dot grid and the border of the page. And so I just use that space too, and so it looks even though it's technically not the same size. But I don't exactly write tiny, so having more space on the calendar is kind of necessary for me. So then I wanted to incorporate that blue color again, so I just highlighted the bar where I put the days of the week. And yes, I start my weeks on Sundays. I know a lot of people start their weeks on Mondays. And then I'm just writing in with another fine liner the actual numerical dates. Now we're moving on to my goals and achieved page. I always put this page by the calendar because it forces me to look at it more often, because I look at my calendar pretty often. So for the goals, I obviously put goals for the month, but I like to make them pretty small, and by small I mean like to where I can actually achieve them. And as you see here, I put 5 boxes for goals, and I don't force myself to put more than 5 goals. I don't even always put 5 goals. It's just to make it a little easier on myself. And for achieved, I only put 3 boxes, because if you achieve 3 things in a month, that's pretty good. So I feel like I always go through that spiel in all of my videos. But next up is actually a new page for me. This is the page where I'm going to put my goal trackers. So I have 2 main goals I'm working on during the year, and I only have 2 because I don't have much time with school. And so the first one is weight, and then the second one is music. So these trackers are just mini calendars, and each day I can write whether I worked on that goal, and then I put space to the sides of the calendars where I can write my progress. So like, let's say for example, for music, I finish a song, so I can mark off the days on the calendar that I worked on the song, and then on the side I can write, I finished 1 song. And what you see me doing here is I'm using a thicker fine liner for the outer box, just to make it look a little less monotonous. And then I use a thinner fine liner for the inside boxes. Honestly, I don't know if this will work out for me or not, but I think it's worth a try, because I feel like we all make these big goals at the beginning of the year, and you're like, we're gonna get this done, we're gonna take over the world, all that New Year hype. And then we end up completely forgetting about our goals. And so just having it in my monthly spreads also helps reinforce it and reminds me, oh yeah, I do have these goals that I'm trying to achieve. And then I use the blue marker for weight and the purple marker for music. And by the way, for music, I just want to get a certain amount of songs done in the year. That's my goal. I'm not going to elaborate even more because it's not public. Now I'm using a white gel pen, the same white gel pen as before, to write the days of the week in the top bar. And for some reason on the blue it wasn't showing up that well, but on the purple it showed up really well. But anyways, then I added some more sparkles, because why not? And at first I just added a drop shadow with the thin side of the markers, but I thought it didn't really stand out all that well. So then I went in with a fine liner and outlined the drop shadow, and I think it made it stand out much more, and I like it so much better that way. And what you'll notice is, so I tend to decorate my cover pages, and then the other pages I don't like to decorate that much, because for me the most important part of a bullet journal is for it to be functional and for it to keep me on track. So having decorations everywhere limits the amount of space that you have for planning and for doing other things. And so I still use the same color scheme to add pops of color, but I don't like to decorate it too heavily. Anyways, next is my budget page. So the top box is my wish list. As usual, I have 3 columns. First column is for the item. The second column is for the price that it costs. And then, because I obviously don't get everything that's on my wish list every month, I have a third column where I just put the prices of the things I did get so that I can calculate and make sure that I'm still within budget. And then below that, I have another table for expenses. And here I have 3 columns again. The first column is for the item. Second column is for the place I got it, so like Amazon, Michaels, etc. And then the third column is for the price. And these rows that I'm coloring in at the bottom are just the total rows where I tally up all the money. And here I'm using a fine liner to make the columns. What you'll see is for wish list, I actually used the fine liner also on the banner where it said wish list, and that was a mistake. So I didn't do that for expenses, and I like how expenses looks a lot better. So then I tried to go over the lines with a white gel pen, again, the same white gel pen, and then I went over it later on with the marker again. And I think it blends pretty well. It's still noticeable, but it's not that noticeable. Anyways, we are moving on, and this is the last spread of my bullet journal setup for February. This is my weekly spread. So what you'll notice is I actually changed up my weeklies. I changed it in the middle of January because all of a sudden my workload for class went up exponentially. So I needed more space to write the daily to-dos and less space for the weekly stuff. So instead I'm breaking down the page into, well, first I have the banner going across, and then I have 8 boxes. The first 7 are for the 7 days of the week, and then the 8th box is for my weekly tasks. And this way I have much more space, which is very much needed, to write down my homework assignments. And my tasks for the week can be more like just goals for the week that contribute to my bigger monthly goal. So for the top, I used a soft tip Tombow Funnosuke brush pen. And then for the days of the week, I'm using a fine liner, but I kind of wish I used a thicker fine liner because when I write, it's pretty close to the same thickness of the pen I used to write my assignments, so it kind of blends in. But anyways, we have reached the end of the video. This is my final flip through. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please, please, please subscribe and like. It helps me so much. You have no idea. And if you want to see more, turn on that notification bell. Alright, bye.